They live on your street. You see them at the grocery store. Your kids have play dates and go to school together. You perhaps see them weekly at a church service. Well, on day 2 of our Deeper Love series, we are exploring the relationship we have with our neighbors. And it's one we often overlook, but when our lives are so intertwined, my next guest says it's important to get to know them, and love them deeply. Host of KSL's Inside Sources, joining me, Boyd Matheson. Welcome back to Studio 5.
Always good to be back.
I mentioned this at the beginning of the show, but I feel like especially because fences or walls were kind of forced upon us the last couple of years for safety and health reasons, I don't know that those walls almost came all the way down.
Yeah, emotionally we haven't come all the way back.
We need this connection more than I think we realize.
Yeah, we really do, and you know, it is the second great commandment to love your neighbor. That's a very pretty high priority there. And these are also, it's Sesame Street. These are the people in your neighborhood. They're the people that you see every day, and how often we kind of take them for granted, or they kind of become part of the backdrop in our lives, when if we would lean into those relationships, they are so rich, and it's actually what really pulls us together. It's the fabric of society, and to your point, it's really frayed over the last 5 years.
I love how you described that, the backdrop. They are kind of the blur. Like they're always there, smiling away, but you believe the effort, because it does take effort to connect with these people that we didn't choose.
Right.
They were, the zip code was assigned to all of us, or I guess we chose the zip code. But the first thing you say, you have 4 ways that we can learn to love our neighbors more deeply, and it starts with suspending judgment. And this is perhaps the most effort-inducing of all.
Yeah, it requires a lot of work. It's so easy to judge, and we live in this rapid-fire world where we're instant certainty, automatic judgment.
Oh, we know.
And because we know all the right things. And so learning to just step back, restraint always works in relationships, especially with neighbors. Just cool off. I always say, speak in anger and you'll give the best speech you'll ever live to regret, especially to a neighbor or a spouse.
Yes.
And so learning to just suspend judgment, recognize that most people are just doing the best they can, regardless of the circumstances. And whether they're driving a little too fast down the neighborhood, or maybe their lawn's not quite the way it should be, or their kids are acting out and behaving, most people are just doing the best they can. So suspend judgment. It just creates space for a different kind of conversation and a different kind of connection.
It takes effort too, because of the discipline it requires. Next to your spouse, I think we're interacting with them even at a distance the most often.
Yeah,
I mean, you're seeing your neighbor more than you're seeing your in-laws, or more than you're even seeing your best girlfriend sometimes.
Yeah.
So to continue to practice that restraint of judgment does take discipline.
It takes a lot of discipline. It's so easy to just start that snap judgment thing. And again, we get it in the media all the time, where people are serving up these hot takes and instant certainty about what happened and why and how. Just learning to step back is a great tool.
Yeah, I saw a meme the other day. This is kind of a tangent, but it said, the older I get, the less certain I become. And isn't that true, as you soften and realize the world's bigger and more complicated than you realize? Number 2, don't be preemptively offended.
This may be one of my all-time favorites.
Let's hear it.
Because so often we become preemptively offended. So you come over to my house and my house is a mess, and I know you're judging me because your house is so tidy and so perfect. Or you see my children acting out or doing something or crying at the store, and I know, because you're so perfect, you're judging me because of my kids.
And I haven't said anything or done anything.
Exactly, exactly. I had a woman rush into a meeting one time during the pandemic. She had forgotten her mask and forgot that she forgot her mask. She just rushed in, and she said, "Oh, I felt so guilty. I knew everybody was looking at me and everyone was judging me." I said, who's they? And who is that? And so sometimes we kind of have a little chip on our shoulder, and so we become preemptively offended because I know what you're going to say, or I know how that guy's going to react, and that's usually not true.
I love that. I love that. Don't be preemptively offended, and catch yourself in that moment, and almost second guess what you think you know.
Yeah, we create these monsters in our mind. And so we have to suspend that.
Question your own stories. Here's one that would take probably the most time, and that's to listen completely.
Completely. One of the interesting things that we have started to do in our society is we immediately start talking as soon as someone finishes. And often we do it with a comparative statement. So you're telling me about your great trip to Hawaii, and the moment you stop, I say, well, I was in Hawaii, 3 months ago, or, oh, I have a sister who lives in Hawaii. And so we immediately pivot to us. And so the real art to making that connection, especially with a neighbor or a new acquaintance, is the art of the follow-up question, which you are the master of. But it's so important that we do that rather than going to the next comparative statement, or I knew that, or I know somebody that, to just step back and just let it settle. Ask a follow-up question, and then if you want to share something else, that's great. That's part of that conversation. But so often we race into it, and so to the other person, it often feels like, Well, he wasn't even listening to me. He was just waiting for me to stop so he could start telling his story.
Right. So he could brag about his Hawaii trip.
Yeah.
It does take elevation of character, though, because the intent there is good. The intent there is to connect.
That's right.
Like, I want to connect with you. I want to form a bond with you. But it does that restraint to listen and to ask the follow-up question, to dig deeper. That's where the real connection is.
And listening, I think, is one of the holiest and deepest things we can do for another person. And when people feel like they have been seen and heard, that's transformational in any relationship, neighbor or otherwise.
I'm not going to forget that. The most holy thing we can do. I love that. All right, finally, greet each person you encounter with love in your heart.
Yeah, really interesting. My dad introduced me to Og Mandino when I was young. Little fictional stories that teach success principles. And in his classic, The Greatest Salesman in the World, he talks about greeting the day with love. And there's one little segment of it that has just always stuck with me. He says, "And how will I confront each whom I meet today?" And the answer, in only one way: in silence and to myself, I will address him or her and say, "I love you." Though spoken in silence, these words will shine in my eyes, unwrinkle my brow, bring a smile to my lips, and echo in my voice. And his or her heart will be open. And that's how you get a neighbor.
That's how you get a neighbor. Boyd, well done. Thank you so much. Where can we hear more from you, my friend?
KSL News Radio, 1 to 3.
You're my companion after the Chick-fil-A drive-thru as we're doing the pickup. So thank you so much for the good you're putting out into the world and the challenge on the table to love our neighbors more deeply.